Hello, everyone. Welcome again to We Are the Builders, Australia's live study group. Tonight we've got a good friend, comrade Joe Montero, joining us. How are you today?
Great, and I hope you're doing well as well.
Yep, it was been flat out busy today. Many issues. I mean, obviously, involving union work. It's never a dull moment. Put it that way in the
Yeah,
class struggle. So
no,
I could put it this way: if our those who've been experienced as organisers and shop stewards, and know what I'll be talking about. Well, I just want to first of all acknowledge country that we like to acknowledge. I'm on the land of the Jar Jar Wurrung, where it's been filmed from, and also there's plenty of other nations out there. And I'd like to acknowledge the elders, the past, the present, and the future, and also acknowledge that their struggle was originally a struggle against colonialism and invasion of their lands, which now has further been involved and entwined in the struggle against imperialism imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, and obviously against US imperialism in our age. Uh, Tonight, and talking about this, we are still continuing on with our work from Mao Zedong on New Democracy, and we're on channel 7. We're, imagine that.
oh God, that's the worst.
Imagine that. No, we're on chapter 7, and all of a sudden there's been a takeover of Channel 7. Yes, anyway, we're on chapter 7, refutation of bourgeois dictatorship. Or I think what we just do is probably read a page at a time, and then. But as we go through the chapter, we'll have a discussion. For all the viewers out there, feel free to ask any questions. Yeah, feel free to ask any questions or make comments, and we'll try to address them as well. And also ask viewers to share this far and wide, press the like button, invite other people to join in. So, what we'll do, if you like, Joe, Joe, would you like to kick it off? And
Yeah,
yep,
that's okay.
hmm,
Don't mind. All right, it's chapter 7 we're on, refutation of bourgeois dictatorship. More than 90% of the people are in favour of a republic of this kind, with its new democratic politics and new democratic economy. There is no alternative road. What about the road to a capitalist society under bourgeois dictatorship? To be sure, that was the old road taken by the European uh, and American bourgeoisie. But whether one likes it or not, neither the international nor the domestic situation allowed China to do the same. Judging by the international situation, the road is blocked. In its fundamentals, the present international situation is one of a struggle between capitalism and socialism, in which capitalism is on the downgrade and socialism on the upgrade. In the first place, international capitalism or imperialism will not permit the establishment in China of a capitalist society under bourgeois dictatorship. Indeed, the history of modern China is a history of imperialist aggression, of imperialist uh, opposition to China's independence and to her development of capitalism. Earlier revolutions failed in China because imperialism strangled them, and innumerable revolutionary martyrs died, bitterly lamenting the non fulfillment of their mission. Today, a powerful Japanese imperialism is forcing its way into China and wants to reduce her to a colony. It is not China that is developing Chinese capitalism, but Japan that is developing Japanese capitalism in our country. And it is not the Chinese bourgeoisie, but the Japanese bourgeoisie that is exercising dictatorship in our country. True enough, this is the period of the final struggle of dying imperialism. Imperialism is moribund capitalism, but just because it is dying, it is all the more dependent on colonies and semi colonies for survival, and will certainly not allow any colony or semi colony to establish anything like a capitalist society. Under the dictatorship of its own bourgeoisie, just because Japanese imperialism is bogged down in serious economic and political crisis, just because it is dying, it must invade China and reduce her to a colony, thereby blocking the road to bourgeois dictatorship and national capitalism in China. In the second place, socialism will not permit it. all the imperialist powers in the world are our enemies, and China cannot possibly gain her independence without the assistance of the land of socialism and the international proletariat. That is, she cannot do without the help of the Soviet Union and the help which the proletariat of Japan, Britain, the United States, France, Germany, Italy, and other countries provide through this struggle against capitalism. Although no one can say that the victory of the Chinese Revolution must wait upon the victory of revolution in all these countries, or in one or two of them. There is no doubt that we cannot win without the added strength of their proletariat. In particular, Soviet assistance is absolutely indispensable for China's final victory in the war of resistance. Refuse Soviet assistance and the revolution will fail. Don't the anti-Soviet campaigns from 1927 onwards provide an extraordinarily clear lesson? The world today is in a new era of wars and revolutions, an era in which capitalism is unquestionably dying and socialism is unquestionably prospering. In these circumstances, would it not be sheer fantasy to desire the establishment in China of a capitalist society under bourgeois dictatorship after the defeat of imperialism and feudalism? Even though the petty Kemalist dictatorship of the bourgeoisie did emerge in Turkey after the First Imperialist War and the October Revolution owing to certain specific conditions, the bourgeoisie's success in repelling Greek aggression and the weakness of the proletariat. There can be no second Turkey, much less a Turkey with a population of 450 million. After World War II and the accomplishment of socialist construction in the Soviet Union in the specific conditions of China, the flabbiness of the bourgeoisie with its proneness to conciliation, the strength of the proletariat with its revolutionary thoroughness, things just never work out so easily as in Turkey. Did not some members of the Chinese bourgeoisie clamor for Kemlamism, I should say, after the first great revolution failed in 1927? But where is China's Kemal? And where are China's bourgeois dictatorship and capital society? Besides, even Kalama's Turkey eventually had to throw herself into the arms of Anglo-French imperialism, becoming more and more of a semi-colony and part of the reactionary bourgeois, imperialist world, I should say. Do you want to break there or?
Yep, I'll take over, Philip.
Yeah, just in there, I've got a thing because there are some things, the conditions are a bit different because this was talking at the time of the ending of the Second World War, where capitalism was left weak because of the Second World War and the Great Depression before it. And it was a period back, it didn't quite turn out as Mao foresaw at that time, as most communists foresaw at the time. There was a period of rebuilding at the end of the 40s through the 50s, and which created, basically a capitalist boom, and we're still here. But we are now approaching having gone full circle.
Yeah.
Not only have we got the stuff, some of the elements of the pre-war situation, not as drastic as the Great Depression, but we don't know where today will be going. But we've also got an increase in drive to war. So there is also a parallel. So we've gone through a period which has been quite different than what was envisaged, but we're back to normal in a sense.
Yeah, and I've got on to say comment too, because especially when this was when Miles written about development of capitalism, but China wasn't basically China wasn't allowed to develop and advance forward anywhere while it was under the crux of any imperial power, be it Japan, Britain, German, French, whoever, American as well. because it wasn't just British imperialism, it wasn't just Japanese imperialism. There was quite a few European countries involved in the suppression of China. And so what he was talking, what it looks like, what he was talking about there, this is even capitalism. It wasn't the Chinese capitalists at all. They weren't able to develop. They were actually suppressed as well. And what we're seeing, because the imperialism requires countries like, or when they colonize or whatever take over, they require countries such as China, especially at the time, to be underdeveloped, to be poor, and not to advance, and that way they can actually throw all the debt and poverty onto them and extract whatever mineral, not mineral resource, that's part of it, but whatever riches out of it into the lands of the few. So it's quite interesting when we've seen that as well.
Yeah.
Made that comment. This is not Chinese capitalism. This is Japanese, and that was at the time of Japanese imperialism.
Well, there was an argument around. It was quite widely held at the beginning of the 20th century that imperialism would bring the development of capitalist relations to where it goes, and so eventually the whole world would become industrialized, modern capitalist society. But the experience has been, it hasn't done, it's actually done the opposite. It's held most of the world in backwardness in many ways. So that's something to understand. I think an interesting thing is Australia, because Australia is one of the few unique countries in the sense it kind of sits in the middle road, because this country was initially the initial development through British capitalism, and after the Second World War, a large reliance on American capitalism. And we have now today that if you look at corporations across the board, they're basically owned by American interests. British are there too, but this sort of development of a homegrown capitalism, or a capitalist class, it's there, but it's been a bit arrested, shall we say. It hasn't fully developed like it has in the United States or Western Europe. Japan.
That's an interesting point, that. All right, we'll shall continue. Do you want me to take over for a while for the reading? Yep. All right, we'll continue on. Oh, yes. The international situation. Well, you finished off where it says imperialist world. And then it starts, in the international situation of today, the heroes in the colonies and semi-colonies either line up on the imperialist front and become part of the forces of world counter-revolution, or they line up on the anti-imperialist front and become part of the forces of world revolution. They must do one or the other, for there is no third choice. Judging by the domestic situation too, the Chinese bourgeoisie should have learned its lesson by now. No sooner had the strength of the proletariat and of the peasant and other petty bourgeois masses brought the revolution of 1927 to victory than the capitalist class, headed by the big bourgeoisie, kicked the masses aside, seized the fruits of the revolution, formed a counter-revolutionary alliance with imperialism and the feudal forces, and strained themselves to the limit in a war of communist suppression for 10 years. But what was the upshot? Today, when a powerful enemy has penetrated deep into our territory, and the anti-Japanese war has been going on for 2 years, it is possible that there are still people who want to copy the obsolete recipes of the European and American bourgeoisie. A decade was spent on suppressing the communists out of existence, but no capitalist society under bourgeois dictatorship was suppressed into existence. It is possible that there are still people who want to have another try. True, a one-party dictatorship was suppressed into existence through the decade of communist suppression, but it is a semi-colonial and semi-feudal dictatorship. What is more, at the end of 4 years of communist suppression, from 1927 to the incident of September 18, 1931, Manchukuo was suppressed into existence, and in 1937, after another 6 years of such suppression, the Japanese imperialists made their way into China south of the Great Wall. Today, if anyone wants to carry on suppression for another decade, it will mean a new type of communist suppression, somewhat different from the old. But is there not one fleet-footed person who has already outstripped everyone else and boldly undertaken this new enterprise of communist suppression? Yes, Wang Qingwei, who has become the new style anti-communist celebrity. Anyone who wishes to join his gang can please himself, but wouldn't that turn out to be an added embarrassment when talking big about bourgeois dictatorship capitalist society? Kemalism, a modern state, a one-party dictatorship, one doctrine, and so on and so forth. And if, instead of joining the Wang Qingwei gang, someone wants to come into the Fight Japan camp of the people, but imagines that once the war is won, he'll be able to kick aside the people fighting Japan, seize the fruits of victory of the fight against Japan, and establish a perpetual one-party dictatorship. Isn't he just daydreaming? Fight Japan, fight Japan. But who is doing the fighting? Without the workers and the peasants and other sections of the petty bourgeoisie, you cannot move a step. Anyone who still dares to try and kick them aside will himself be crushed. Hasn't this too become a matter of common sense? But the diehards among the Chinese bourgeoisie, in hyphen I am referring solely to the diehards, hyphen, seem to have learned nothing in the past 20 years. Aren't they still shouting, restrict communism, corrode communism, and combat communism? Haven't we seen measures for restricting the activities of alien parties, followed by measures for dealing with the alien party problem, and still later by directives for dealing with the alien party problem? Heavens! With all this restricting and dealing with and going on, one wonders what kind of future they are preparing for our nation and for themselves. We earnestly and sincerely advise these gentlemen, open your eyes, take a good look at China and the world, see how things stand inside as well as outside the country, and do not repeat your mistakes. If you persist in your mistakes, the future of our nation will, of course, be disastrous. But I am sure things will not go well with you either. This is absolutely true, absolutely certain. Unless the diehards among the Japanese bourgeoisie wake up, their future will be far from bright. They will only bring about their own destruction. Therefore, we hope that China's anti-Japanese united front will be maintained and that with the cooperation of all instead of the monopoly of a single clique, the anti-Japanese cause will be brought to victory. It is the only good policy. Any other policy is bad. This is the sincere advice we communists are giving, and do not blame for us for not having forewarned you. If there is food, let everyone share it. This old Chinese saying contains much truth. And since we all share in fighting the enemy, we should all share in eating. We should all share in the work to be done, and we should all share access to education. Such attitudes as I and I alone will take everything, and no one dare harm me, are nothing but the old tricks of feudal lords which simply will not work in the 1940s. We communists will never push aside anyone who is revolutionary. We shall persevere in the united front and practice long-term cooperation with all those classes, strata, political parties, and groups and individuals that are willing to fight Japan to the end. But it will not do if certain people want to push aside the Communist Party. It will not do if they want to split the united front. China must keep on fighting Japan, uniting and moving forward, and we cannot tolerate anyone who tries to capitulate, cause splits, or move backward. Wow, there's a bit there, but I think he basically just laid the ultimatum for those people who are jumping and chopping and changing all the time, and that you're either on you're on our side or you're not. And I like how he just put the old one. There is no third way. There's no other certain way. There's got to be another way. We've heard this before. No, there isn't, and I think that's just putting an ultimatum for the people who might be wavering.
Yeah.
To go. Yeah, you can't.
Yeah.
I like this old term, and I know it's good old working class term. But I learned it this way ages ago. For those who waver, it's either going to join. Well, you sit on the fence long enough, you're going to get a picket up your ass. So I mean, it's just
I guess I heard that one before. There is a thing here, a paragraph, a quote, where when he starts criticizing attitudes, I and I alone take everything, and the other one is no one dare harm me. And it reminds me of something you do see around the place. Often the people are driven will talk and say the right word, but they're driven by what they get out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sort of thing. We see people all the time like that. And, it's not solely their fault in the sense that we live in a world that encourages that sort of thing,
Yeah.
to the prevailing ideology, but sometimes it comes under the guise of revolutionary language, should we say.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
"Oh, you got to do it my way or I'm going home.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll pick up
Yeah.
my ball and going to mum." So,
Yeah. Yeah. And look, to me, it's also quite infantile as well. For that sort of behaviour, it's got to be my way or I'm not going to be involved. Well, it's like, well, hang on, this is not about one of those persons. It's about a collective
uh,
way moving forward. And I was actually hearing an interesting discussion today on another YouTube channel. It was an interview with Stephen Gowans, and he's the author of What's Left. He's very interesting. He's in Canada, I think, Ottawa. Yeah, Ottawa, Canada, or Ontario. I'm not too sure. But what was I going to say? And someone mentioned about how under our society, how it's very individualised, and the economics or the economic system creates the person. Where under a socialist system or a communist person, we're creating a different type of person, where a more collectivist approach and working for the common good for everybody instead of just oh no, it's all about me. I'm okay. You bugger everybody else. And I thought it was quite interesting. He was talking about the role of the pandemic and how various countries dealt with it. Very, very interesting analysis. But I just thought when I heard that, I thought, yeah, I get that. And then probably reading that, that's where I'm sort of hearing this from. I'm seeing quite common thing is, oh, no, it's just all about me or my
yeah,
way and everything else. Yeah. And that goes
yeah,
with
well,
anything. Not
it is.
just,
I mean, how many times have been in a room where there's a discussion about, oh, we got to do this, and this would be great, and we got to do that. Any volunteers, and
yeah,
everybody does.
yeah. Everyone run
That's sort of, so that's yeah. So I think he's also referred to that sort of thing as well.
yeah,
But with these sort of bourgeois elements, it's more prevalent. Just that one
Mm.
thing information that Manchukuo, however you pronounce it, that was that region that was occupied earlier by Japan for a period of time, on the
Yep.
grounds that there's mainly a Korean population there, ethnically Korean,
Okay.
the people there, and it does border with Korea,
Yeah. Mm.
and for a long time, Japan saw Korea, including that, as its territory. So there's a historical major contradiction between Korea and Japan as well.
Mm.
So they got mixed up with it, but it is part of China now. I have been there in that area. It's quite nice here. It gets a bit cold though in the winter. It's up in the northeast.
Yeah. Okay. Mm. Also,
Uh,
yeah, I had trouble trying to pronounce that. And yeah, here it is. It's Manchukuo. Yeah,
yeah, mate.
Manchukuo.
And the Chinese pronounce it and Korean entirely differently. So
Yeah.
don't
It could
worry
be
about it.
Luke's just called Manchuria. That could be it, would it?
No, Manchuria is a different
Oh, right.
area.
Okay.
It was,
Oh, mm.
yeah, but yeah. So nobody can pronounce the stuff if you're from a Western language, a Western culture. It can be difficult. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. No worries. All right.
Yeah. So we're on the next one.
Yeah,
Want me
sorry,
to
just my
go on?
messages, Facebook messages made that sound. Chapter 8, refutation of left phrasemongering. Did you want to kick that off?
Yep, I can do that.
I'll go on mute.
If actually we were talking about that, weren't we? Sort of. We were almost entered into that. Anyway, if the capitalist road of bourgeois dictatorship is out of the question, then it is possible to take the socialist road of proletarian dictatorship. Should be a question. No, that is not possible either. Without a doubt, the present revolution is the first step, which will develop into the second step, that of socialism, at a later date. and China will attain true happiness only when she enters the socialist era. But today is not yet the time to introduce socialism. The present task of the revolution in China is to fight imperialism and feudalism, and socialism is out of the question until this task is completed. The Chinese Revolution cannot avoid taking the two steps. First, of new democracy, and then of socialism. Moreover, the first step will need quite a long time and cannot be accomplished overnight. We are not utopians and cannot divorce ourselves from the actual conditions that confront us. Certainly, certain malicious propagandists deliberately confusing these two distinct revolutionary stages advocate the so-called theory of a single revolution in order to prove that the three people's principles apply to all kinds of revolutions and that communism therefore loses its raison d'etre. Utilizing this theory, they frantically oppose communism and the Communist Party, the Eighth Route and New Fourth Armies, and the Shansi Ningxia border region. Their real purpose is to root out all revolution, to oppose a thoroughgoing bourgeois democratic revolution and thoroughgoing resistance to Japan, and to prepare public opinion for their capitulation to the Japanese aggressors. This is deliberately been fostered by the Japanese imperialists. Since their occupation of Wuhan, they have come to realize that military force alone cannot subjugate China and have therefore resorted to political offensives and economic blandishments. Their political offensives consist in tempering wavering elements in the anti-Japanese camp, splitting the United Front and undermining Kuomintang communist cooperation. Their economic blandishments take the form of the so-called joint industrial enterprises. In Central and South China, the Japanese aggressors are allowing Chinese capitalists to invest 51% of the capital in such enterprises, with the Japanese making up the other 49%. In northern China, they are allowing Chinese capitalists to invest 49% of the capital, with Japanese making up the other 51%. The Japanese invaders have also promised to restore the former assets of the Chinese capitalists to them in the form of capital shares in the investment. At the prospect of profit, some conscientious capitalists forget all moral principles and itch to have a go. One section, represented by Wang Qingwei, has already capitulated. Another section, lurking in the anti-Japanese camp, would also like to come over. But with the cowardice of thieves, they fear that the communists will block their exit and, what is more, that the common people will brand them as traitors. So they've put their heads together and decided to prepare the ground in cultural circles and through the press. Having determined on their policy, they have lost no time in hiring some metaphysics mongers, plus a few Trotskyites, who, brandishing their pens like lances, are tilting in all directions and creating bedlam. Hence, the whole bag of tricks for deceiving those who do not know what is going on in the world around them. The theory of a single revolution, the tales that communism does not suit the national conditions of China, that there is no need for a communist party in China, that the Eighth Route and New Fourth Armies are sabotaging the anti-Japanese war, are merely moving about without fighting, that the Shansi Ningxia border region is a feudal separatist regime, that the Communist Party is disobedient, dissident, intriguing, and disruptive, and all for the purpose of providing the capitalists with good grounds for getting their 49% or 51% and selling out the nation's interests to the enemy at the opportune moment. This is stealing the beams and pillars and replacing them with rotten timbers, preparing the public mind for their projected capitulation. Thus, these gentlemen, who, in all apparent seriousness, are pushing the theory of a single revolution to oppose communism and the Communist Party, are out for nothing but their 49 or 51%. How they must have cudgelled their brains. The theory of a single revolution is simply a theory of no revolution at all. And that is the heart of the matter.
I'll finish this off if you like. But there are other people, apparently with no evil intentions, who are misled by the theory of a single revolution and the fanciful notion of accomplishing both the political revolution and the social revolution at one stroke. They do not understand that our revolution is divided into stages, that we can only proceed to the next stage of revolution after accomplishing the first, and that there is no such thing as accomplishing both at one stroke. Their approach is likewise very harmful because it confuses the steps to be taken in the revolution and weakens the effort directed towards the current task. It is correct and in accord with the Marxist theory of revolutionary development to say of the two revolutionary stages that the first provides the conditions for the second, and that the two must be consecutive, without allowing any intervening stage of bourgeois dictatorship. However, it is a utopian view rejected by true revolutionaries to say that the democratic revolution does not have a specific task and period of its own, but can be merged and accomplished simultaneously with another task, that is, the socialist task, which can only be carried out in another period. And this is what they call accomplishing both at one stroke. We'll open up for comments and questions and that. Let's yeah, go on. Sorry, Joe.
I think particularly in China's situation with a very backward capitalism and restricted capitalism, it was quite fancy. But also the other thing which applies now, and one of the things that a lot of the left and various groups and individuals here and in other countries are often fooled, particularly with what's going on around the world, in other countries, that because they don't have a grasp that two things that things develop according to the conditions that people are experiencing, whatever terrain they're in, but also they must progress through a certain path, and that's where it often gets replaced by phrasemongering. You know, it's not about real life. It's about refining and getting right in their minds what is written down on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
In real life, in everything we do, we know that we can't build a house just by wishing there was a house there, or going to an empty block with a hammer and then walk out again and there's a house. You've got to build foundations. You've got to build the structure there. Yeah, there are various stages you need to go through to have that house.
Yeah.
And society is the same. And if people are trying to build a new society, they have to build a foundation. They have to put the floor in. They have to put the walls up. They have to put the roof, and then decorate or whatever goes, all the stuff that goes with it. And it's understanding this. And it's been a major argument when it shouldn't be in the international movement. We see it in Australia where, various members of various groups around the place, I won't name any, when you talk about, stages in a revolution, they throw their arms up in horror. And said, you can't walk from here to the next corner without taking your first step. And I just want to expand on that because I think he's talking about the big thing we're talking about in Chinese new democracy and socialism. One thing is that even that's why you have strategy and tactics, that even reaching that is a process through the anti-Japanese war, the struggles before it went through a series of paths or stages that it had to go through before it got to the next. Otherwise, it wouldn't happen. The last thing is that although they are separate, and I think he makes that in this paragraph, his statement, they are not entirely distinct either on the thing that one lays the conditions for the other. And that's really a dialectical approach, isn't it? Looking at
Yeah.
things that once one thing is completed, the conditions are there for the next one. So it's been made. How long it will take, he mentioned there, a considerable period of time in China. It was some time. There was a bit of I think whether it's longer than or shorter than was envisaged, I don't know. But also one difference with Australia is it still applies, in my view. And that's why we need to be talking about new democracy. According to Australian terms, we have one advantage. We have an economic base which is more developed than China's was at that period.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, our material conditions are quite different from what was China in the 1940s, certainly. And yeah, there's one thing I've learned over the time, and unfortunately, I'm not going to mention names, particular parties and groups and etc. But they want to just take one model and say it's a one size fits all. Here's the blueprint. If you divert from that, yeah, not one of us. Well, hang on. What worked in Russia prior to 1917 and for revolution worked well because of particular material conditions. What worked in China was under particular material conditions, and for us in Australia, we have to work under the material, operate under the material conditions that we live under, and and they're certainly different, and work out ways to do it. I mean, there is no one just blueprint of getting there because it's not like a one size fits all. To make something, because we do that, we're just going to fall back. I mean, look, and I'm not, this was some hard lessons learned for the last, especially for the whole, say, the communist movement here in this country as well, since its inception in 1920, through the Comintern period, the whole lot. It's look, there are certain things they did and everything else, but there was certainly a lot of lessons to be learned from the mistakes they made as well, and some good lessons.
Yeah.
Understand that. Well, look. We've learned this. We've done a lot of exceptionally good things, but we've also done a lot of exceptionally things that just completely, well, I'm saying bad, but they were big mistakes, and we had to learn from. And the best lessons learned are the hard ones. So we've got some hard lessons to learn.
The ones that kick you on the teeth.
Yeah,
they're the best ones. I mean. It always, there's this thing. It's not it's not like the October Revolution. Just reminds me of one criticism that Lenin himself made of people. He said, "Stop praising us so much, and learn something about what we did." Because we need to go even that experience, all experiences. That it was much more complex. It was not. The October Revolution did not come about because a bunch of Bolsheviks got out there and they took a banner out in the street with socialism printed on it. It came about because workers, peasants, and soldiers were revolting because they couldn't live in the conditions they were living. It was not a question of socialism. It didn't come in at that point. But they could no longer live they were in the way they were. And what was the slogan? The slogan of the October Revolution was not socialism. It was bread, land, and peace. Right? People needed food. The peasants needed land so they could eat as well. And they wanted to not die in the First World War.
That's right.
But the logic of that, once that revolution for those three demands came underway, or exploded, I should say, it drove people in the direction of socialism. That momentum carried in that direction. But to say that a social change, a revolution, is the result of a decision or just a slogan taken by some committee is really ridiculous. And it's often thought in those terms. That's why some of the silly brigade will say, the only thing getting in the way is that certain people in leadership are not calling for a revolution. If they call for a revolution, In Australia, there'd be one tomorrow.
Hmm.
Don't look at the conditions.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, look, there might be questions of the system we live under. There might be opposition to certain things and policies and that. But really, it's hasn't it, conditions. We're not in revolutionary conditions as such. We would commonly know about, and that's interesting. You make comment because revolutions are different. The Soda Revolution was different from the Chinese one. Chinese one's different from say the Cuban one and the Korean one as well. DPRK. It's also different from the Vietnamese one. So on and so on. And Nepal as well. Venezuela, Nicaragua, etc., etc. The list keeps going. They're different how to go about it. I mean, what the thing is, though, one of the things we have to learn, the October Revolution, the Russian Revolution needs, yes, lessons learned. And it's also quite inspiring. I mean, certainly, and that was, if you were alive around that time, and of course, you've seen the drudgery of the capitalist system in our own respective countries. Of course, that was inspirational. That was empowering. That was the end of World War One, basically, and really that was the linchpin to get ready to stop World War One in its tracks. And not, but that's and trying to prevent any further bloodshed. But it certainly has been, and they finally said, right, well, and it was certainly inspiring of workers' struggles elsewhere. That was formed the basis there. So a lot of good things. But yeah, you are right. Learn said you need to learn what is, and also from the mistakes as well. But also Lenin, I didn't probably put it in these words, but basically some of his work, what he's basically explaining about. Learn how to get revolution going in your own country. You figure it out for your own country. Don't keep telling them, I'm not going to get you to tell you how it's done. You're going to have to figure that out. And I think that's something we for us here in Australia, moving forward, talking about new democracy and how we, then that's going to be the actual discussion. How we move forward here.
Well, a revolutionary movement is created by the conditions, but it develops. It's developed by the people who engage in it, not the people who talk about it.
That's right.
And that's one of the big lessons because and we have that we're particularly intellectuals unpleasant because they've got there's a lot of good ones, but there is a bit of a tendency to judge the world from a little bit of a distance and not get your hands dirty. You've got to actually engage in the process to understand it.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just going to mention something else, and actually, it was that's right. Because I mean, for people just like an organisation say, oh, they're revolutionary. Well, on what historical basis, on what material grounds that they are? And what was interesting, actually, I highly recommend this book. Reading it to everyone that's viewing this is History of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Bolshevik, and they explain that book how it formed. Communists didn't form the Soviets; workers and peasants did that themselves. They got involved. They saw the importance of that, getting involved. A lot of these things, but you could see how the revolutionary struggle happened, and then the party that evolved out of it. It's not the other way around. You form the party first and have a revolution. It's the other way around, and it was born out of the struggle.
Well, really, I mean, until the October Revolution, until really the last weeks, they came, because of the conditions people were facing. They formed the Soviets, which means it's the Russian word for councils. They formed their councils, and the dominant political force were the Mensheviks, right? And they were. What happened there is when people said, look, we jacked up, and the Mensheviks had actually formed the government because that was the second revolution for the year. It was 6 months earlier. The Mensheviks had formed the government, and people expected these three things. They expected food, they expected land for the peasants, and they expected pulling out of the First World War. And they didn't do it. And things got worse for people, and they jacked up.
Yeah.
And the only political party that, and the Bolsheviks had a few people in the parliament as well. And the Bolsheviks actually were arguing until the last couple of months they were trying to convince the Mensheviks of a coalition with them. The Mensheviks refused. And all of a sudden, when it erupted, the Soviets, one after the other, turned to Bolsheviks to lead them. They actually unvoted their leaders. They called new votes. They voted them down and voted the Mensheviks. And there's a thing, John Reed, who wrote the book, The 10 Days That Shook the World,
Yes,
was an eyewitness. And he went, I think it was the Moscow Soviet, and he observed what was going on. And he said, Leon Trotsky gave a brilliant speech, and he played a positive role during that period. And then Lenin was the intellect there. And then there were these, the deposed, the deposed Mensheviks were there, and a couple of others who were sort of allied with them, and there was an approach made to Lenin and said, let's form a deal. Why don't we have a coalition? And reportedly, Lenin's reply to them was, "You're too late, mate. Nobody wants you anymore. You got no value."
Yeah.
But you did it to yourselves was the message.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if you had supported the working people of this nation, they would have rallied behind you. You failed to do that. And that's what created the conditions for the Bolsheviks to actually move into that vacuum. But they certainly didn't create the Soviets.
No, that's right. That's right. Some interesting thing. Just before we go on to the
they did create a chain of bars, though, which was.
Oh yeah. Actually, Luke asked a question. I've seen Joe. How do people get their hands dirty, and what does that look like? Just curious.
What was that? Sorry. On the next one,
yeah. One of the viewers, Luke. He asked Joe, how do people get their hands dirty? What does that look like? Just curious. Did you want to comment on that? I was just going to say, look, this is how the people actually getting into the nuts and bolts work. Very actively trying to engaging with ordinary people. If that's what you mean, they're actually out there, not just sitting around and talking about it all the time, turning things into a chat fest, and then leaving that chat fest feeling good. It's knowing more.
Yeah, I think it's also more than that, because I think it is. There's an element of getting out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
And doing things sometimes that are not so easy to do. One example, for instance, in our current world here in Australia, most people who want to talk about Marxism and socialism and communism talk about it to people who already agree. The idea of actually going out to ordinary working people with appropriate language and actually engaging them, conversing with them, is much more challenging. And sometimes it's the easy option is not to do that. The problem is, if you don't do that, you don't build a movement.
That's right. And look, I think it's important. I've brought this up in my own videos and discussions with others, and also with our US comrades as well, overseas comrades. Basically, I've got that little bit of an advantage in the sense where I'm an organiser of a union. I can get out. I talk to workers every day, engage with them and all that. With one section of workers at least. But the fact is, with others it isn't. But we need to do it. And I would argue say, if you know if there's a strike on, picket line, great place to actually engage with them that way, because the level of struggle is actually a lot higher than it would usually be. But also too, the ordinary just activities of every workers, where they're at, engaging with them and being, talking one-on-one. I mean, they've been setting up a little stall in a shopping centre, engaging with people there. A great way to start door knocking. It's just all these simple things. Just finding
there is one caution when you're doing that, and it's all got to be done, is don't preach at people.
That's right.
You must have conversations with people, and I think that's often one of the failings. Is a tendency also to think you're talking with people. If you're preaching them, here's the good book, and this will save you. We've got that one before in other places.
Yeah, and And look, I mean, the fact is, the end of the day, we've got to make sure we're not just going in there thinking that we're right on everything.
No,
We need to find
absolutely.
our views on things and also taking their concerns and consolidate things and put it back to them and all that. And find out what it is because it's really important. Luke, I'll answer that next question in a little while. Another one, just at the moment, because we'll start on chapter 8. That's I think we've finished that. We'll continue on chapter. No, it's not chapter 8. Chapter 9.
Chapter 9
John,
there.
do you want to kick that off?
Okay. Refutation of the diehards. The bourgeois diehards, in their turn, come forward and say, well, you communists have proposed the socialist system to a later stage and have declared the three people's principle being what China needs today. Our party is ready to fight for their complete realization. All right, then, fold up your communism for the time being. A fearful hullabaloo has recently been raised with this sort of argument in the form of the one doctrine theory. In essence, it is the howl of the diehards for bourgeois despotism. Out of courtesy, however, we may simply describe it as totally lacking in common sense. Communism is at once a complete system of proletarian ideology and a new social system. It is different from any other ideology or social system, and it is the most complete, progressive, revolutionary, and rational system in human history. The ideological and social system of feudalism has a place only in the Museum of History. The ideological and social system of capitalism has also become a museum piece in one part of the world, the Soviet Union, while in other countries it resembles a dying person who is sinking fast, like the sun setting beyond the Western Hills, and will soon be relegated to the museum. The communist ideological and social system alone is full of youth and vitality, sweeping the world with the momentum of an avalanche and the force of a thunderbolt. The introduction of scientific communism into China has opened new vistas for people and has changed the face of the Chinese Revolution. Without communism to guide it, China's democratic revolution cannot possibly succeed, let alone move on to the next stage. This is the reason why the bourgeoisie diehards are so loudly demanding that communism be folded up. But we must not be folded up. For once communism is folded up, China will be doomed. The whole world today depends on communism for its salvation, and China is no exception. Everybody knows that the Communist Party has an immediate and future program. The minimum and maximum program with regard to the social system it advocates. For the present period, new democracy, and for the future socialism. There are two parts to an organic whole, guided by one and the same communist ideology. It is not, therefore, in the highest degree absurd to clamour for communism to be folded up on the ground that the Communist Party's minimum program is in basic agreement with the political tenets of the three people's principles. It is precisely because of this basic agreement between the two that we communists find it possible to recognize the three people's principle as the political basis of the anti-Japanese United Front, and to acknowledge that the three people's principles being what China needs today. Our party is ready to fight for their complete realization. Otherwise, no such possibility would exist. Here we have a united front between the communism and the three people's principles in the stage of the democratic revolution. The kind of united front Dr. Sun Yat-sen had in mind when he said, communism is the good friend of the three people's principles. To reject communism is, in fact, to reject the united front. The diehards have concocted absurd arguments for the rejection of communism just because they want to reject the united front and practice their one party doctrine. Moreover, The one doctrine theory is an absurdity. So long as classes exist, there will be as many doctrines as there are classes. And even various groups in the same class may have their different doctrines. Since the feudal class has a feudal doctrine, the bourgeoisie a capitalist doctrine, the Buddhists Buddhism, the Christians Christianity, and the peasants polytheism. And since in recent years some people have also advocated Kemlamism, fascism, vitalism, the doctrine of distribution according to labour and what was not, why then cannot the proletariat have its communism? Since there are countless isms, why should the cry of folded up be raised at the sight of communism alone? Frankly, folding it up will not work. Let us rather have a contest. If communism is beaten, we communists will admit defeat in good grace. But if not, then let all that stuff about one doctrine which violates the principles of democracy be folded up as soon as possible.
To avoid misunderstanding for the edification of the diehards, it is necessary to show clearly where the three people's principles and communism do coincide and where they do not meet. Comparison of the two reveals both similarities and differences. First, the similarities. They are to be found in the basic political program of both doctrines during the stage of the bourgeois democratic revolution in China. The three political tenets of the revolutionary three people's principles of nationalism, democracy, and the people's livelihood, as reinterpreted by Dr. Sun Yat-sen in 1924, was basically similar to the communist political program for the stage of the democratic revolution in China. Because of these similarities, and because of the carrying out of the three people's principles, the united front of the two doctrines and the two parties came into existence. It is wrong to ignore this aspect. Next, for the differences. 1. There is a difference in part of the program for the stage of the democratic revolution. The Communist program for the whole course of the democratic revolution includes full rights for the people, the 8-hour working day, and a thorough agrarian revolution, whereas the three people's principles do not. Unless these points are added to the three people's principles and there is the readiness to carry them out, the two democratic programs are only basically the same and cannot be described as altogether the same. 2. Another difference is that one includes the stage of the socialist revolution and the other does not. Communism envisages the stage of the socialist revolution beyond the stage of the democratic revolution, and hence, beyond its minimum program, it has a maximum program. That is, the program for the attainment of socialism and communism. The three people's principles, which envisage only the stage of the democratic revolution and not the stage of the socialist revolution, have only a minimum program and not a maximum program. That is, they have no program for the establishment of socialism and communism. 3. There is a difference in world outlook. The world outlook of communism is dialectical and historical materialism, while the three people's principles explain history in terms of the people's livelihood, which is, in its sense, is a dualist and idealist outlook. The two worlds' outlooks are opposed to each other. Pardon me. 4. There is a difference in revolutionary thoroughness. With communist theory and practice go together, that is, communism possesses revolutionary thoroughness. With the followers of the three people's principles, except for those completely loyal to the revolution and to truth, theory, and practice, do not go together and their deeds contradict their words. That is, they lack revolutionary thoroughness. The above are the differences between the two. They distinguish communists from the followers of the three people's principles. It is undoubtedly very wrong to ignore this distinction and see only the aspect of unity and not of contradiction. Once all this is understood, it is easy to see what the bourgeois diehards have in mind when they demand that communism be folded up. If it does not mean bourgeois despotism, then there is no sense to it at all. Wow, didn't take me in there, but it's a great way of actually putting that there, the differences between the respective forces, that, and especially in the well, at that time, the anti-Japanese imperialist United Front. It shows you the program of one group only want to go so far, advance so far, but whether they program the other, but the communists want to actually, well, no, once we've got there, we can now start establishing and advancing further. And it was a lot more advanced program. Yeah, it's a lot more advanced process than what was originally showed of the former. So that's why I wanted to keep that in mind when we actually are doing United Front work. We do have those things in common, the same, but also too to understand the differences as well and how they intertwine and the relations between each other. Look at the contradictions within it as well. And I'm glad he mentioned dialectical and historical materialism. Because that's our world outlook. That's what we see things. See the unity of opposites. We see, the continuum of matter in motion, etc. So that's something that was really, really good how he put that actually, and
it is. There is an implied there's an implication there that in the nature of a united front is both unity and difference. And it is, because when you get, whether it's two classes or two political parties or two of anything, agreeing to work together, they never see everything eye to eye, but they agree on what's important for now.
Mm-hmm.
And leave the rest, let that sleep to another day, more or less. It's not quite that clear cut, but and he says, and it takes practical form, and I think these things saying where the three principles, and I think the next chapter, which is for another time, but talks about sort of some general principles.
Yeah.
In this, the Communist Party position, some practical measures that must be applied that are not contained there. So that thing about the shorter working day and all the other stuff that was there, the livelihood of the people was, that. So while they're working in the United Front, they can actually do that. And what they did in the experience, that in the areas that they do controlled, they actually implemented these things. And actually, people saying, "Oh, geez, they pay them more over there than they do over here. They get more than we do." So it actually built their support base in that. And some of the others that they wanted to be part of it and they wanted to still be popular, they had to catch up.
Well, see, what was interesting about the Communist Party of China at that time and struggle, it understood the importance of production even during revolution and a revolutionary war in the United Front. So land reform and agriculture, basically you can't have a starving army. You've got to learn how to also use production and such. You can't have a starving population. So that's what they actually did. So at the same time, they were actually putting emphasis on the importance of bringing new production, all new means of production, and what to advance in a capitalist one, for example. And so, we were talking about land reform and all that before, regarding when we launched Australians for a New Democracy, and we talk about that land rights and land reform, because land is an essential part to the means of production. Without land, I'm pretty sure there is no production. Well, what are we producing stuff for? There is no land to grow food and everything else. So, I mean, food just doesn't appear out on a production line, out of a factory. It's got to grow somewhere. So, and so what they've done is, there is work about that, but he actually emphasised that but what actually made the fundamental difference in the communists and the rest of them, the United Front, is that they certainly made importance of production at the same time and changing the modes of production as well for the benefit of the people during that time. So they always kept it in mind. Well, it's no point just going out there, revolution, overthrow, fight. Okay, great. But what have we got here to stabilise the other side of things? What are we there to replace it? And that's what I want to get to. That's what I get to, and I've said this a couple of times before. An old painter and docker told me this. He passed away now. But he says, when you oppose something, fight something, or arguing against something, make sure you have an alternative in place ready to. And
Oh,
I thought,
yeah, it pays.
so that's what they actually were. We've got an alternative, and we're actually putting it in place as we're proceeding. So it's quite interesting how they went about it. And I have to admit, it's just they just got on and did it as well. There was no there probably was obviously vibrant discussions and arguments about the way forward would do that, but they just still get in there and they just did it. And that's actually shows you a good living example of what we can, and some certain things we can do as well when we start organising, etc.
Well, there is, and I think that particularly in a war situation. I mean, there and it's in other countries, the same sort of thing has happened. Where you've got this sort of division. The Kuomintang increasingly resorted when it travelled through an area. Not that they did much fighting the Japanese, but they commandeered food stocks and from the peasants, they just took it off them. Where the communists didn't do that. They actually encouraged it. They ensured that they had enough to eat first. And the result of that, it won their support. Even went to the extent that during this period, when the Chinese currency collapsed, which the Kuomintang was using, the communists issued their own currency. It was actually worth a lot more. So people wanted their money. So there was all these things were going on, and the attitude amongst the masses, Chinese masses, came around to saying, "Look, at least the communists look after us; they protect us," and that was the key difference. And they were great strategists. They was amongst the most strategic movement ever. My argument is, I think they still are. They're still fantastic strategists, which in the current situation, the US, UK, the Quad group and that don't fully appreciate that they're much better at strategy than they are. There's a whole history there. But it's a question again, what is decisive in any revolutionary struggle is winning the support of the bulk of the population.
Yeah.
And you have to look after them to do that.
Yeah, and that's right. And I mean, that's the most important. And also winning the trust and building that, rather than being involved in their struggles in the first place. I think that's vitally important. Not just coming from, on the sidelines screaming, slogans and whatever else, and then denunciating everyone because it didn't go their way. I think it's not the way to go. But there's certainly a lot to learn from this. And from this experience of what the relevance for us here in Australia now. Yeah, sure. And like I said this a little bit earlier, we might not be in a revolutionary stage at the moment. But things can happen very quickly over the next few years, and we've seen this around the world, in the US, elsewhere. Things are changing very rapidly, and we'll give it time. It will happen. So happen in Australia, and I think it's just where we've got to be, where people are at, and talking and be engaged with them in everyday stuff. I know Luke actually asked another question about organising outside the union movement. Right. Sorry to pester you, but what does organising look like outside the union? Well, I think we have to also learn how to walk before we can run on that. I mean, they're smart ass about it, but what I was saying is, about organising, community, for example, our own neighbourhoods, our communities, etc. But to help people empower themselves and all that. And we've got to be looking to do it. I mean, yes, I do talk a lot about trade union stuff because that's what I'm involved in, right? And that's normally that is a first call for me, right? But I mean, there's other areas if you're not involved, whatever. I would encourage you to look at other avenues. Maybe there could be something to get the people together about, and it could be a certain good key issues, and it could be also just organising people to start looking out for other people after other people within your neighbourhood. How that strategy is, and I believe I think you, Joe, and I think Helen and a few others have been involved in the show have been trying to take those initial steps first. We'll be looking at that, and also too something else out of the union movement as well is also the cooperative side of things, Earth Worker Cooperative, and many others. I know there's been a lot of talks about no, cooperatives are not the men, not socialism. We get that, but that's where you've got a concentration of people involved in production. Totally important, and how they can actually let's start to understand. Well, we can actually run the system without bosses and the bourgeoisie anymore. We do anyway. All as workers, we run the system anyway. But we just don't come to that realization. We don't need bosses. If you know what I mean. We're actually able to quite sufficiently take over and run themselves. So we've got a lot of practical experience there. It's a matter of trying to explain it into everyday, ordinary workings of working people, be it in the trade union sector, cooperative sector, in the community, club, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think the way we're going, cooperatives and other forms of collective production.
Yeah,
there are various forms that are possible.
Mm.
It's not just that they might be a good idea, is that at certain times they become necessities. Because when you get to a stage where working people, well, first of all, they don't have jobs. A lot of workers are out of work. They become part of the Labor Reserve Army. But also they don't have access to basic things. We've had a taste of that a little bit in Melbourne over COVID. The toilet paper issue. It's funny when you talk about toilet paper, but just imagine that, but with basic staple food and other necessities.
Mm.
So experiences have been, particularly when your countries there is a political crisis and and it's developing, find themselves without these things, and they are compelled. Working people are compelled to get together to produce their own needs collectively because no one else is.
That's right.
Right. And one thing that should be much better known, because often, October Revolution, they all charge down the street. No. A big part, yes, there were the Soviets, but there were also the cooperatives. There was a huge cooperative movement in Russia at the time that actually was part of the revolutionary process. And as you said, Dave, I mean, cooperatives and collective production in different forms form fantastic training schools. Not only do those who work there find, oh, geez, the boss isn't here, and it's the place is still ticking over, often ticking over even better than the ones where the boss is. But it's also where workers learn skills to organise, and that's indispensable.
Yeah. And that's right, and spot on the mark, and that's right important. So, it's not just the trade union side and cooperatives, but the community. It's when we start to learn the importance and how we can organise, and that's what we'll learn again. So, look, I'm not going to continue on. I think we've continued on unless I've missed anything, or we've pretty much covered a lot tonight. I know we're just finishing a little bit earlier, and there's some comrades off to go and watch the Australian Citizens Party live. That's a LaRouche party. Yep, and obviously, they'll be watching this later on. But I'd like to give a big shout out to people like Luke Master, Jan. I'm sorry I couldn't include you, but you're on the phone. But I'll send you a message later on in touch, and if you'd like to be involved, Comrade Pinko. Oh, and please subscribe to Comrade Pinko's YouTube channel. With more support in the world. Another comrade in struggle here. He's also also is quite frequent on Ewoks Unhinged as well. So please go to Ewoks Unhinged. Big shout out to James Graham. I'll mention Luke as well. Thank you, Luke, and Hugo Chavez. Great name. I'm glad he's inspired you too, comrade. As well. So, and look, and thank you again tonight for everyone for watching. Did you want to mention anything else we might have missed tonight?
No, I think we just about run out of time. I think for all of us and for the listeners, if they hopefully have found what's been read and said has some value, there's a little bit to assimilate and think over.
Yeah. That's right.
And learn from for all of us.
Yeah, and for any of our comrades who do, or our people like watching us, if you do like to be involved one time, send us a message and see if we'll organise to be involved on these live streams. Highly recommend if you want to pick up some of this works. You could actually go to Marxist.org as well. The classic material is if you can't buy it in book form. However, look, I want to leave it at that. The next live study will be in 2 weeks' time, again at the same time, 7 p.m. on the 24th of February. Ben, we are fortnightly live study, and I hope you got a lot out of it tonight. And look, thank you all again, everyone, all the viewers. Thank you, Joe. Also, big shout out to Helen. She's just over in WA at the moment, in 40-degree plus heat. So yeah, she wasn't able to join us tonight, and yeah, prepared to shoot us a line if you ever wish to join. So we'll leave it at that. We'll just put our fist in and finish it off. Workers of all countries unite. Thank you. We're out.